Good morning. Well, what a place, huh? This morning when I gave the address to the taxi driver, I heard these words that you never want to hear from a taxi driver. He said, "I've never been there." Well, I said this was my first time too. Well, anyway, thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to represent the European Investment Bank for the second year in a row. We are here, and we are really delighted to be able to speak to you. So thank you very much. You've heard my name is Rafał Rybalski. I'm responsible at the EIB for our lending activity in the public sector in the 3 Baltic states and in Poland. So I have an honor and a big responsibility to open this conference. Opening speeches are very important. They say they should be the smartest of all the speeches that you will hear today. They should give directions, you know. So it's a big responsibility which stays on my shoulder. I'm sure this is too much for me. I'm sure I cannot cope with this. So, because I'm a simple banker, so I'll do what the bankers do the best. I'll tell you a little bit about my financial institution. And because it's a big financial institution, it's actually the largest international financial institution in the world, and it has accumulated 60 years of experience in financing infrastructure. I hope that based on my presentation, we can also draw some general conclusions that will be applicable to all of us. So let's begin. European Investment Bank is actually a group of 2 institutions, the bank and the fund. The fund focuses more on the SME portfolio guarantees, so it's maybe of less relevance for the infrastructure conference, but it is a very important financial institution. The bank focuses on financing infrastructure among other priorities, so we'll be focusing more on the activities of European Investment Bank today. We've been, as I said, with you for 60 years. That's our headquarters. The right-hand side building, this is the glass one, this is the bank. Just for you to know, on the other side of the street is European Court of Justice. So when you pass this road, which is called Konrad Adenauer, you have bankers on the right and judges on the left. How cool is that? Huh? We are a partner to all the EU institutions. In fact, we are owned by the member states. So whenever I say how great we are, I have to remember, and you should know, that we are that great because of you, because of our shareholders. The bank is AAA rated, and this rating we owe to our owners. In fact, whenever we are assessed by the rating agencies, all 3 of them, they usually check on the commitment of the member states to support the bank. So we are only big and powerful and good because we have very strong and powerful shareholders. And we are also an example of how much can be achieved if we work together. We are like a living example that unified Europe can produce something big and effective. Without this, we wouldn't be there. You know that now one of the member states is leaving. So even though we are strong enough to sustain this departure, this causes us a lot of trouble. We would not like to see this happening in the future. So again, we will survive, we will be strong enough, but it's hard to see one of our partners departing. So again, working together, especially for large infrastructure projects, is a very important thing for us. As I said, we are the largest multilateral lender and borrower in the world. I emphasize the word borrower because we borrow on the markets. We are not dependent on the EU budget. We have our own money, which we borrow through issuance of bonds on the international capital markets. We have about 3,000 people of staff working mainly from Luxembourg, but also from different local offices. These are the volumes of our investments that we do every year, roughly about 70 billion euro worth of new projects we finance every year. So you can imagine our balance sheet is right now quite significant. We'll see how it goes in the future. We are anti-cyclical, so whenever there is a need, we increase our lending. But when there's a prosperity and time is good, then perhaps there's no need for such a large intervention from the bank. These are our priorities. So we like to invest in environment, infrastructure, innovation, and SMEs. We monitor this. So because our money is very attractive, we don't want to distort the market in general. So we focus our interventions where it's really needed, when it's needed for Europe. This is how much we lend in the course of last 60 years. Now, it's interesting. You look at 2004, when Latvia joined the EU. Until that, the curve was a smoothly shaped going up. Now, I'm Polish, so actually we joined the EU in the same year as you did. Look, all the trouble started when we joined, huh? You see, 2004. No, then suddenly the volatility. Now, of course, this is a joke. There was a Lehman Brothers on the way. There were many other disasters on the way. But the truth is that Europe, or the European Investment Bank, was growing steadily without almost any interruptions for many, many years, until recently, when suddenly the world started changing even more and even more rapidly, and all these volatilities happened even to the largest financial institution in the world, which is also, you know, kind of a general wisdom that you never know. Infrastructure projects are long-term. They last for ages. But in the meantime, there may be many peaks and downs like this. And whatever we create, it has to be resilient enough to sustain all these volatilities. Now, this was all done based on a typical financing model, which is we had the money and we were lending money to other people. And now I depart from the presentation about the bank as such, and I come more to the topic of my presentation today, which is what people call the Juncker Plan, or the European Fund for Strategic Investments. So at some point, people realized that they cannot simply increase our equity, and we cannot simply pump money through loans, through normal loans, like we used to for the last 60 years. At some point, people realized there's not enough public sector money, because even though we issue bonds, we do have equity, and we do have equity needs, which then have to be satisfied by the shareholders. So at some point, they said, let's think of an alternative structure. And we should all think of alternative structures for financing of projects. And they came up with this idea. They came up with an idea of a Juncker Plan, European Fund for Strategic Investments. The idea is such, simply speaking, let's take the public money and use it as a guarantee. So you see, EU contributed about 16 billion, not that much for their budget, but still a huge amount. EIB also came with another 5 billion euro, and we created this fund. This fund serves as a guarantee cushion. And this fund underlines our lending and the lending of our daughter company, EIF. So think about the concept. You can actually replicate it with any public money you have. Normally, public sector, normally infrastructure projects, they are done by simply lending to these projects. Sometimes even, quite often in our region, by providing grants. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Grants are excellent. Soft loans are fantastic. But the leverage that you achieve through this is not that great. Usually, well, in our case, we always lend maximum 50% of the project cost. So the leverage is usually, 2, sometimes maybe more, We give the money, somebody else puts another 50%. Here we go, we have an infrastructure project. However, with the guarantee, you can achieve a much bigger leverage. Because, first of all, due to this guarantee, we could raise much more money on capital markets. So there was a first multiplier, which was achieved internally by EIB through our treasury operations. And then there was another multiplier, because whenever we invested somewhere, we also required other people to come in with their own money. And for this, we were even prepared to take a subordinated position, to crowding in, as we call it, even more other people's money. So together, these multipliers could be around 15 times. So €1 of public money used as a guarantee could produce €15 worth of final projects. That was the idea, which actually worked in practice. So this model, please bear in mind, public money used to create a guarantee, used to secure lending of an institution such as EIB. Now, we've been doing this for 4 years now. This was not easy. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I just sat in my room, I closed the door, and I was thinking, okay, so what sort of lessons learned from this? What interesting observations we can draw upon this financing model? And here are some of them. Just put them in a random order. There is no logic behind them. But that's something to think about. That's something I'd like to share with you. So first of all, when there is a need for a guarantee, there needs to be risk. So please don't ask me how much money the Latvian government received from EFSI, because Latvian government is a very safe borrower. We wouldn't need an EFSI guarantee to lend to the Latvian government. Even municipalities in our region, they are quite well established. They have their budgets, they have their taxes. They are too safe to borrow from EFSI. To them, we can lend our normal money. We don't need strategic fund for strategic investments for that purpose. But, as you see from the second block, public sector projects could actually be pretty risky. That happens when they're done through companies, through different SPVs. Of course, such SPVs have different arrangements with public authorities, but there could be arrangements which are pretty commercial, actually, and an entity which is involved, which is engaged in creating a new project, becomes actually quite risky. And when I say risky, I'm not saying crazy risky. I'm just saying risky. It is more risky than lending to a municipality or to a government. And if you think of infrastructure loans which are for 20 years, then you can think, well, I showed you what can happen in 20 years, right? On this graph you saw. How many Brexits, how many Lehman Brothers can go bust during a period of 20, 30 years. So when you lend to a municipal company, even though at the beginning this company has full support from the municipality and everything is perfectly, and there is a fantastic spreadsheet done for the next 25 years, who knows what's going to happen? And if there is no automatic recourse to the municipality or to the government, then the whole thing actually looks a bit more risky. All right. Now, another thought. The same thing can be done differently. You can build a road. Traditionally, you can build it through a PPP, or you can build it through a special purpose vehicle which is actually owned by the public sector. So we learned all this when we studied the EFSI, the Juncker plan, because before that, we would just come to the government and say, yes, that's actually the only structure we are interested in, is this governmental funding, because we are a very risk-averse institution. Because of EFSI, EFSI gave us opportunity to look into some other options which are much more risky. This was a lesson learned for us. Maybe not for other people. Maybe commercial banks would say, we've known this, but not EIB. I mean, EIB, of course, we also knew it, but we were not practicing it that much. We are more kind of into traditional lending. PPP is certainly not dead. You know, I'm not a big enthusiast of PPP. There is my colleague from EIB who is. I am not. I am too old. I used to be. But I saw how difficult it is to develop any PPP project. But now I see that there is no alternative. For the moment, I see no alternative to PPP when we talk about smart financing of large infrastructure, which is off balance sheet. So again, that was clearly visible through practicing of the Juncker plan. Leverage. Leverage is important. It is more important than the volume. You'll see, I show you the table which shows how much we did in the Baltic states. For instance, Estonians managed to invest less money, but achieve a higher result measured by the final output because they managed to employ higher leverage. So leverage is a big thing. Blending is not easy. You hear about blending quite a lot. People say blending is fantastic. They only say that, but it's actually a nightmare to blend money, especially public money, from different resources. And here, this is a message for decision makers, for policy makers. Don't just say blending is great. Make it possible. Blending of EFSI with structure funds is difficult. There was a guide, like a paper produced, which was entitled Blending Juncker Plan with Structure Funds. I read it. I thought this is actually a guide which effectively tells you that you cannot blend. That's true. It's very difficult. But again, that's an area that we can explore. That's an area for improvement, because it should be easier. Somehow it's not for the moment. Now, I said PPP is not dead. But how about public partnership? How about these special purpose vehicles created by municipal authorities? We know that, I mean, a tram company or a transport company, municipal transport company is a company. It can borrow on the market against public sector contracts with municipality. But this concept you can actually replicate to other investments as well. You can even build a bypass, a city bypass using this concept, even though there will be absolutely no revenues. I mean, the market revenues. All the revenue will be coming from the municipality. Now, if you ask me how this will be treated by Eurostat, it will be treated as a public debt. If you ask me why people are still doing it, I'll tell you because there are efficiencies. There are efficiency gains on the way. You establish a special purpose vehicle. This special purpose vehicle perhaps will dedicate more time, will create the investment with a bigger attention than if you were to do it traditionally. So actually this public partnership is a good source of Juncker Plan projects because, as I said, the risk there is a little bit higher. Crowding and signaling, very important. This is what public money should do. Crowding other investors. Again, the multiplier. And this was one of the objectives of the Juncker Plan, that each euro we invest should crowd in our money, other money, and should give positive signal about the project to the market so that the project is able to attract more money. Cooperation of public sector or financial institutions can play an important role. After all these years, I've suddenly become a big fan of public financial institutions. They actually can provide a lot of value added to the market, provided that they work together. And we, as EIB, we are very much open to such a cooperation. And last but not least, as they say, advisory services, something very important. Usually people who start doing something, they believe they know how to do it. Usually they are wrong. Advisors are a very important part of the Juncker Plan, of this program that was created by EIB and the European Commission to stimulate investments in Europe. And these advisory services are needed everywhere, not only in new member states, also very much in the old member states. So these are all the lessons learned from me. You know, you might have some other ideas, thoughts. We'll be happy to discuss them later. These are the numbers, something which probably is of interest to you. Look at the numbers. I will quickly tell you what they mean. So total financing volume, Lithuania 324, is in million euro. Latvia the second place and Estonia the third. But then when you see at the investment, so how much final investments this initial financing volume triggered, then Estonia is slightly ahead of you because of the leverage. But it's also because they have this SME multiplier, which is really huge. That was done by EIF, by our daughter company. So, they only took 69 million, and they almost, multiplied it by more than 10. So the multiplier helped there. But generally, the picture here is that the situation is, is not that different among the 3 member states. The volumes are small, we have to say it, but also the markets are not so huge. This is based on the approvals. So the actual money going to final beneficiaries may be less. They may not need all this money. But it's fine. I tell you that sometimes people think the banks, the commercial banks, I'm not criticizing them. I would do the same if I were them, but I'm not. So sometimes they say, or they think, well, EIB will not be interested in this. The risk here is far too much. So, we can dictate our own conditions. And then EIB, because of the Juncker, because of this guarantee, actually came and said, no, we can finance it now. Last year, maybe we couldn't, but now we can. And then we come with our, very long tenors, attractive pricing, blah, blah, these sort of things. So this introduces, discipline on other people. Suddenly, other people have to come down with their requirements because they know that EIB could do it cheaper. And there are cases when they actually come down to such an extent that they become even more attractive than EIB. And they get to finance the project. Okay, I can't say I'm very happy when this happens because we have invested a lot of time in preparing the project, making the commitment, and then suddenly somebody just free rides and takes the whole stake. So I'm not happy. But at the same time I am, because to some extent my job was done. The presence of EIB, the signaling, was such powerful that my borrower could achieve a better financial conditions on the market than from me, which is okay, right? I hope it will not be happening all the time, but if it happens once every 5, 10 projects, that's perfectly okay. So anyway, these are the numbers. We continue working with investors in Latvia and in all 3 countries. So these numbers most likely will go up soon. Now, a natural question would be, so what did you actually finance? Well, we finance different things. Here you have it. You can actually, when you go into our website, you can actually get the actual names of all these projects. We are a very transparent financial institution. I just gave you the sample here. So a municipal transport company which has a public sector contract with the municipality. This public sector contract is not really assignable to banks. So we have to sort of believe that this public sector contract will be there, but we cannot really use it legally as a security for our loan. So it is kind of a risky, frankly speaking. Something may happen there, and of course we believe that it will not happen because it's an important transport company. But, again, it's a very long financing. No security there, so, a nice territory for Juncker. A university, we finance university in Riga. Fantastic thing, not through the ministry. It's a direct loan to the university based on the cash flow generating potential of the university. They have tuition paying students. Again, the loan is very long. Right now they have enough students, but in 5, 10 years, of course, we all wish them very well, especially now when we already lend them the money, but anything can happen down the line. Right? So it is, you have to admit, it is a slightly more risky project than just, much more risky than just lending to the government. CHP, the same thing, so it's district heating. Oh, I should be finishing. The airports, again, you could say the airports never go bust. Well, but you know, when you take the size of the investment that needs to be done, in this case it was Tallinn Airport, it's a huge investment, and it's a relatively tiny airport. Again, without any support from the state, it's risky. So anyway, you have, and the investment funds, microfinance, risk sharing, this is done by EIF. So here you have like a map of different options. I think that's it. That's all I wanted to say at this stage. I will be asked, I'll be asked some tricky questions now, so I'll be happy to answer, and then I'll be around to answer any other questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's give another round of applause for Rafał. Thank you. And then if you could stay for a few minutes, we can discuss a few of the topics you mentioned already a little bit more in detail. And now also to you, all the participants, if you have any specific question, please do not hesitate to ask. If we can start with the easy one, probably. How do you compare ourselves, the Baltic region, with other regions of Eastern Europe or Poland when you are also working?
That was the easy question.
Yes, of course. Let's just see. It probably comes up slowly.
Yes, it's well, frankly speaking, every country is different. Obviously, smaller markets have their own specificities than larger. I'm Polish, so, and then the team of people I work with, we operate on sort of a Baltic states and Poland, so naturally we can compare. But it's very difficult to compare because the size are different. The EU budgets dedicated to these countries are different. I would say there's probably more similarities than differences, frankly speaking. The selection of options is smaller here. In larger countries like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, even Poland, you can finance many things. You go out and, you just walk along the street and you finance and you find projects. Here you have to look deeper. Things are, are not happening around every corner, which is obvious. Also, maybe the one prominent difference, especially in the public sector, is that here a lot of money is channeled through central governments. Which again is probably perfectly justified, whereas on different markets, maybe self-governments have larger budgets. So, for instance, I would say, let's say in Poland we do around 2.5 billion worth of projects. Out of this, about 40% goes directly to self-governments, to local municipalities and regions. They have their own budgets and they have their own borrowing capacity. They don't need to ask Warsaw for permission. They can do whatever they want within certain financial ratios that they have to comply with. So this sort of increases a little bit the options. You don't travel all the time to Warsaw, but you can travel to places that maybe you haven't been before. Whereas I think in the Baltic states things are a little bit more centralized.
Apart from, let's say now, then growing size-wise for the Baltic states, what needs to be improved in your eyes in our region to become a better investment place?
It's very hard, it's very hard to advise. I don't want to be this wise man. I give you the example. I told you the EIB is located in Luxembourg. Luxembourg is even smaller. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Luxembourg. For instance, I don't know whether many of you know that Luxembourg was actually, until early 70s, an agriculture and heavy industry state. They had some steel works, Arbet, which is now ArcelorMittal. They had some even mines, digging iron ore, and a lot of farmers. So the industrial sort of mix was very old-fashioned, outdated. And then, the heavy industry ceased to be so attractive, and then they faced the challenge of, okay, what do we do now? Then they swapped into financial services and EU institutions. But then Lehman Brothers hit, so then banks stopped being so interesting and sexy, and then they had to look for something else. They chose innovations. So I think, the specificity of a little bit smaller markets is that you have these volatilities. You have concentration on certain types of activity, but because the world is changing, then you have to constantly adjust. You have to constantly look, 2 steps ahead. I think this is on the one hand fascinating. On the other hand, it's a nightmare because you all the time have to look ahead because of the volatilities. And you experienced these volatilities yourself when the crisis hit.
Sure.
You were hit more than others because smaller markets have less flexibility.
Coming back to this big issue that we all need to adjust, I would like to touch upon climate change as sustainability issue. And the first, what in your eyes is the biggest challenge for climate change issues and how the Juncker plan contributes to that issue?
I showed you these objectives that the EIB has. Climate is one of them. So we dedicate 25% of our lending to climate. And we do it by lending to renewable energy, to energy efficiency, but also to rail, which could be of interest to you. Rail we give to it 100% of climate action, as we call it, or climate change weighting. So it's actually very much welcome.
Being the cleanest transport.
Yes, exactly. But 25%. That means that 75% we can do without that much positive impact on the climate. And one would say, why? Why not 100%? Well, I'll tell you why. Because roads, for instance, do we need roads? Do we need proper roads, motorways? Yes, we do. But do they have any positive impact on the climate? Okay, you can say they do. If you build a bypass, then you move traffic out of the city. People have a fresher air.
Yes,
but in fact, we don't consider them as having positive impact. I'm not saying they have negative. I'm just saying they're neutral. So for us, a road would be neutral. But do we need a road? Yes, of course we need a road. Do we need a bridge? Yes, even in Western Europe, they need bridges. They need to renovate whatever infrastructure they have, which is not always climate action sort of supportive. So the challenge is that the world is much more complex. If you only do climate action, you will avoid doing important things. So we have to balance it nicely, especially in our part of Europe. I don't know whether you have ever crossed Poland 20 years ago. Probably you would still be traveling.
Maybe some is still.
Some are probably stuck somewhere. Right now, after 20 years of heavy investment, zero climate action, right? Only highways. Well, suddenly, the country can breathe normally because the traffic is moving. So, climate is good, but not everything is climate action. Social housing, that's a good example. We all need social housing. But is social housing focusing on climate action? Well, could be, but in fact, social housing has to be cheap. Things which are cheap usually don't, pay that much attention to climate. They are done rather in a simple way. They are not zero emission, right? Because zero emission costs a lot of money.
You need to start to look on the long-term value as well.
True, but tenants just look at the next month's bill. Huh?
Yes. Sometimes, at least. Okay, if we can stay for the transport sector, so what is needed for Pan-Baltic or a Baltic transport sector to become more efficient and competitive? Can you advise on that? What are the topics and issues?
Very good. That question is far beyond my capacity. So what I will do now, just to entertain you a little bit, my colleague, Marina Ismaila, who is Latvian, Marina, show yourself. She is responsible for the market. I hope she can answer to this question in a much more comprehensive way.
Yes, here in front.
Right.
Thank you, Rafał. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So indeed, the transport sector is an important contributor to the Baltic economy, as Girt has already mentioned. In Latvia, that is the second largest contributor to GDP after the services sector. The sector has challenges, but also success stories. So maybe to start with the success stories, air travel. Riga Airport in 2018 is one of the fastest growing airports in Europe. Actually was the second fastest growing in Q1, in first quarter, with 18% growth. Riga has managed to establish itself as a hub. Vilnius and Tallinn airports also showing quite impressive growth. Air Baltic is the most punctual airline in the world. So we already achieved something of which we can be proud. And then if we go to the challenges in the land transportation and in rail, for example, so for the railway sector in all three countries, the number of passengers is very small compared to European rail sector. However, despite the population differences, for example, in Latvia, the number of rail passengers is 4 times higher than in Lithuania. So there are also still some efficiencies which can be implemented, some targets which then can be met, and the sectors which can be turned around. The reliance on the east-west freight transit is definitely a challenge in the rail cargo sector. However, still there are also efficiencies which can be implemented, such as multimodal logistics, improving the last mile, last stretch to the port, improving the efficiencies in the port. All these can help us achieve better growth and competition. So to bring it a little bit down to earth, rail is a really old school sector, and we would think, what could be done there. But even in a sector like that, the Maersk container, which goes all through the Europe, first on truck, then on rail, then on ship, then maybe on truck again, is a great improvement compared to Shtirotava shunting yard, where the bulk cargo comes, is shunted, the trains are formed, reformed. So there are still best practices which we could learn from Rotterdam port, from multimodal logistics, which will help us grow also in those so-called old school sectors.
If I could have one more final question for you on the general topics, I would like to ask you, what should public sector, which is involved in different stages of any infrastructure project, from planning, appraisal, and delivery, what the public sector should do better in order to ensure sustainable development of infrastructure projects, in your eyes?
Is a complex, these are complex investments, so the public sector should pay constant attention to environment. Procurement is very important to us. In fact, we can reject the project if the procurement was done badly. And economic profitability, which is also not financial profitability. Railways will never be financially profitable. It's difficult to make them, but economically they can be good. So all these analyses should be done by the public sector. Don't jump into deep water without preparing yourself. Dedicated teams help. Special purpose companies, they certainly help because we have experts who focus on the project. They don't have hundreds of other problems on their mind. Another lesson to learn is maintenance. We are now all, we like to hear about a new bridge, a new road, a new railway being built, but don't forget about maintenance. We all saw dramatic examples from Genoa, from Italy, a few weeks ago when the bridge collapsed. The EIB is now developing a special facility to actually maintain this infrastructure in old part of Europe. So maintenance, don't forget, whatever you build today will need to be maintained for another 50 years. It will cost money as well. And maybe, the PPPs. The PPPs is something really to seriously consider, because there will be never enough public money.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do we have one or two questions from the audience at this point of time? If no, then I would like to say big thanks for you to coming down from Luxembourg. And you will stay over the day of conference, so feel free to join and meet both Marin and Rafał. And once again, big thanks to you for coming. Thank you.